So, hi. Okay, kita kembali untuk chapter 3 pula. Chapter 3 for biology KSSM form 4, which is movement of substances across a plasma membrane. So, in this topic, we're going to have 4 subtopics, which is the first one, structure of plasma membrane, followed by concept of movement of substances across a plasma membrane, followed also by movement of substances across a plasma membrane in a living organism, as well as lastly the movement of substances across a plasma membrane and its application in daily life. So we're going to start with the first one. So, structure of plasma membrane. So what is plasma membrane? So the necessity of movement of substances across a plasma membrane. Why is it important for us to have the movement of the substances to move across the plasma membrane? So first, living cell requires substances from the external environment to carry out living processes. So at the same time, the metabolic processes in the cell produces waste that is needed to be disposed out of the cell. So the cell must allow some substances to move into and out of the cell to maintain their living processes. So the movement of substances into and out of the cell is regulated by the plasma membrane. So just a trivia, if you can see here, there's a straight line. There's a straight line as well as an arrow. So what does that mean? So if you see arrows, it means processes. So it's either the thing is going out or going in. So if for labeling, we just use the straight line. Straight line is for labeling. So as we said just now, so living processes, kita benda hidup ni kita perlukan bahan daripada luar untuk kita teruskan aktiviti dalam sel kita. Sama juga, dan kita perlukan keluarkan bahan. Contoh paling senang sekali, kita sedut masuk oksigen. So kita sedut masuk oksigen dan kita akan keluarkan kita punya carbon dioxide. So structure of plasma membrane. So Singer and Nicholson suggested the fluid model mosaic to explain the structure of plasma membrane. Fluid refers to the free movement of protein and phospholipid in the plasma membrane that causes the structure to be dynamic and flexible, and mosaic refers to the arrangement of various types of proteins in the phospholipid bilayer. So siapa yang suggest benda ni? Dua orang saintis bernama Singer dan Nicholson. So the phospholipid molecule is the basic unit of plasma membrane. So phospholipid molecule, which are the type of triglyceride, are arranged in two layers, which is bilayer, to form a plasma membrane. So macam korang boleh nampak kat sini lah, dia ada dua lapisan. So it all begins with a structure of a unit of phospholipid. So they have the polar phosphate head, which are hydrophilic to the water, maksudnya dia suka air, dia attracted to water molecules, and dia ada two non-polar fatty acid tails, which are hydrophobic to the water, ataupun dia tolak, dia repel air. So daripada dua benda ni tadi, dia akan terbentuk atas dan bawah macam ni. So the two layers of phospholipid form a phospholipid bilayer. So dia dah jadi macam bentuk sandwich macam ni. So sebab itulah kita panggil dia phospholipid bilayer. So tapi dia tak lengkap lagi, sebab apa? Dia juga akan ada various type of protein molecule and kolesterol yang ada. So ini adalah molekul protein, ni ada protein lagi, ni ada protein, dan ni ada kolesterol. So kat sini, ini adalah basic unit dia tadi. Apa kita panggil? Phospholipid. Dia ada polar head, which is hydrophilic, and non-polar tail, which is hydrophobic. Ingat, philic sama dengan like ataupun suka. Phobic pula phobia ataupun takut. So Kalau korang perasan kat sini, if you notice here, in the extracellular, we have a protein that attached to a carbohydrate change. So if the carbohydrate chain is attached to the protein, we call them as glycoprotein. And if it's attached to the lipid layer here, so we call them as glycolipid. Okay. So component involved. So cholesterol molecules, it is embedded between the phospholipid molecules, make the plasma membrane stronger and more stable, make the plasma membrane more flexible but less permeable to water soluble substances such as ion. Itu adalah fungsi untuk kolesterol. So as for carrier protein, so it acts as a carrier protein that can carry large molecules such as glucose and amino acid across the plasma membrane. So since large molecule ni dia tak boleh nak terus masuk je. Dia since ruang dia kecil kan kat sini kan. Since ruang dia kecil, so dia tak boleh nak terus masuk. Dia perlukan bantuan carrier protein. As for pore protein ataupun kadang-kadang kita tak jumpa pore, kita jumpa dia sebagai channel protein. So channel protein ni pula is a protein molecule with tiny pores that allow small water soluble molecules and ion to cross it. Only allow substances to cross via passive transport. Passive transport ni apa? Nanti kita jumpa dia. So next kita ada glycolipid which consists of lipids and polysaccharide, and also glycoprotein which consists of protein and polysaccharide. So permeability of plasma membrane. So the concept of membrane permeability is divided into three, which is the first one, a permeable membrane that allows all types of molecule to freely move across it. We have a non-permeable, where it does not allow any molecule to move across it freely. And we have a semi-permeable or selective permeable membrane that only allow a few types of molecule to pass through it, but prevent the other to get through. So the characteristic of phospholipid bilayer, since it has a hydrophobic phospholipid tail which repels water molecules as its core, only lipid soluble molecules and a few types of small molecules can pass through it. So ions and larger polar molecule cannot and penetrate the bilayer. So the plasma membrane is permeable or selective permeable because it transport the substances that across it is regulated by the structure of the phospholipid bilayer, pore protein ataupun channel protein tadi, and the carrier protein. So there are a few types of molecules that can move across the phospholipid bilayer freely, while the other types of molecules move across the phospholipid bilayer through the pore protein or transported by the carrier protein. So dengan itu, kita dah habis untuk structure of plasma membrane. Kita akan continue dengan 3.2, which is the concept of movement of substances across the plasma membrane. So characteristic that of the substances that are able to move across the plasma membrane. So the following characteristic determine the permeability of the molecule across the phospholipid bilayer. First, size of the molecule. So whether it is big or small, sama ada size dia besar atau kecil. Next, the polarity of the molecule. The membrane is permeable to non-polar molecule. Apa yang dimaksudkan dengan non-polar? Maksudnya dia adalah lipid soluble, larut lemak. And impermeable to polar molecule ataupun kita panggil dia sebagai larut air. Especially the large molecule. Last kali it has to be is either ionic charge, sama ada dia ada charge ataupun tak, whether the particle or ion has charge or not. So the plasma membrane only permeable to, hanya membenarkan, hanya telap kepada small non-polar molecule. So small, size dia small and non-polar. So lipid soluble such as fatty acid and glycerol, steroid and vitamin A, D, E, K. So vitamin A, D, E, K is also known as fat soluble vitamin, vitamin larut lemak. And small uncharged molecule, water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, small molecules can move between the gaps of the phospholipid bilayer by simple osmosis or diffusion. So kalau dia cerita pasal osmosis, maksudnya dia tengah refer to water, refer to air. Dan down dia concentration gradient. Apa maksud down of concentration gradient? Nanti kita tengok. So yang tak boleh lepas pula, the plasma membrane is not permeable to First kali, kalau tadi dia permeable kepada small non-polar, so dia tak permeable ataupun dia tak boleh bagi lepas adalah untuk large polar molecule. Polar molecule tadi apa? Anything yang water soluble such as glucose, amino acid and polysaccharides. So it also does not permeable to the charged ion regardless their size. So tak kisahlah saiz dia besar mana sekalipun, kecil mana sekalipun, asalkan dia ion, dia tak boleh nak lepas masuk. Inilah. So the movement of substances across a plasma membrane occurs through passive or active transport. So kalau dia tanya type of transport, kita ada dua, iaitu passive dengan active transport. So passive transport. So the analogy of passive transport is riding a bicycle downhill. The process does not involve the use of energy. So the examples of passive transport are simple diffusion, osmosis and facilitated diffusion. So proses dia macam kita turun bukit. So kita daripada atas bukit nak turun bukit, kita kayuh ke? Tak, kita tak kayuh. Kita kadang-kadang boleh lepas lagi. Sebab apa? Sebab dia tak perlu tenaga. So we start off with simple diffusion. So ni ada gambar dia, simple diffusion. So simple diffusion is the movement of molecules or ion from the area of high concentration, kawasan yang berkepekatan tinggi, to an area of low concentration, ke kawasan yang berkepekatan rendah. So the moving molecules are said to move down the concentration gradient until the dynamic equilibrium is achieved. Dia dikatakan menuruni kecerunan kepekatan sampailah capainya keseimbangan dinamik. So this may occur with or without the presence of plasma membrane. Tak dengan atau tanpa plasma membrane pun benda ni boleh berlaku. So lipid soluble molecules such as fatty acid and glycerol, oxygen and carbon dioxide diffuse through the phospholipid bilayer as simple diffusion. So kiranya dekat sini dia tak perlukan bantuan siapa-siapa untuk lepas. Apa yang dimaksudkan dengan high concentration and low concentration? So kalau korang perasan kat sini, dekat bahagian atas dia akan ada lebih banyak molekul berbanding bahagian bawah ni, low concentration. So apa yang akan berlaku? Bahan-bahan ni akan cross masuk ke dalam bahagian bawah. So for example, kita tengok yang merah ni ada 1, 2, 3, 4. Kat sini ada 2 je. So ingat, dia kena capai dia punya dynamic equilibrium. Apa yang dimaksudkan dengan dynamic equilibrium? Yang belah atas sama dengan belah bawah. So macam mana nak seimbangkan dia? Yang atas salah satu ni kena pergi bawah. And benda yang sama lah untuk semua molekul. Sampailah ke semua bahan-bahan tu mengandungi kandungan yang sama. Itu untuk simple diffusion. Untuk osmosis pula, ingat bila cerita pasal osmosis, it is a passive transport processes that similar to diffusion but only involve water molecule. Dia hanya melibatkan molekul air sahaja. So it refers to the net movement of water molecules from an area of high water potential to area with low water potential through the selective permeable membrane. So the selective permeable membrane is permeable to water but impermeable to some solids such as the sucrose molecules. So the same solution situation occurs in the cell through the phospholipid bilayer. So macam ni kalau kita perasan dekat sini, okey, dekat sini ni sucrose molecule, ini water molecule dia. So water molecule kat sebelah sini lagi banyak daripada sebelah sini. So apa yang akan berlaku? Water molecule tu akan pergi sebelah sana through the process of osmosis. So sama juga macam ni. Dia akan bergerak daripada kawasan yang high water potential into the area with low water potential. Okey, yang ketiga pula kita ada facilitated diffusion. Okey, untuk facilitated diffusion, lipid insoluble molecules such as ion, large molecule such as amino acid and glucose, are unable to pass through the phospholipid bilayer. So these substances move across the membrane with an aid of transport protein, sama ada carrier protein ataupun channel protein. So these processes is known as the facilitated diffusion. So facilitated diffusion does not require energy because the transport protein transport molecules down the concentration. Okey, asalkan bila dia tidak menggunakan tenaga, dia adalah passive transport. Sebab itu dia masuk dalam passive transport dan dia kenalah meneruni kecerunan kepekatan. So this process continue until a dynamic equilibrium is achieved when the concentration of molecule is the same for both sides of the membrane. So sama je macam tadi. As long as dia dah sama kedua-dua belah pihak, barulah kita kata dia dah sampai dia punya dynamic equilibrium. So kita ada dua jenis protein, which is channel protein and carrier protein. Channel protein ni juga kadang-kadang kita jumpa dia sebagai pore protein. So channel proteins form channels or canals to allow small sized solutes and ion to diffuse across the plasma membrane. Channel have specific internal characteristic that only allow specific ion to pass through it. Manakala carrier protein pula has specific sites that can only bind to a specific molecule. For example, a glucose molecule can only bind to a specific site for glucose carrier protein. So untuk carrier protein ni dia ada tapak yang dah spesifik. So kalau tapak itu hanya berbentuk bulat untuk glukos, contoh tapak bulat tu untuk glukos. So hanya tapak glukos yang berbentuk bulat saja yang boleh pergi kat situ. Kalau bentuk lain dia tak boleh nak masuk. So apa yang akan berlaku kat sini? So ni untuk penggunaan ni apa ni? Carrier protein situ. So the extracellular glucose concentration are higher than in the cytoplasm. So ini adalah luar dan ini ada dalam. Dalam kes ni dekat luar kepekatan dia lagi tinggi daripada dalam. So the glucose will bind to the specific site of the carrier protein. Dia akan melekat pada specific site dia tadi. Dan carrier protein akan tukar bentuk. It will change the shape to allow the glucose molecule to pass through the carrier protein and enter the cell. So lepas dia dikeluarkan benda tu, it will return to their original shape and ready for the transport of other molecules pula. So sebagai contoh okay, contoh. Ini adalah molekul glukos saya. So ini saya ada protein, carrier protein. So dia akan, bila kepekatan ke atas lagi tinggi daripada bawah, kat luar lagi tinggi dari dalam, tak kisah sama ada dalam tinggi atau luar tinggi. So dia akan masuk. So dia akan bind, dan bila dah bind dia akan jatuhkan. So dia akan masukkan benda tu ke dalam sel. So kalau katakanlah pula yang kat dalam lagi tinggi, dekat dalam cytoplasm lagi tinggi daripada extracellular, so dia akan keluarkan benda tu. So itu untuk passive transport. Sekarang kita tengok active transport pula. So untuk active transport, so the movement of substances across the plasma membrane may occurs by active transport. So the characteristic of an active transport are as follow. So the movement of ion or molecule substances across the plasma membrane occurs against the concentration. Maksud against, tadi kalau korang perasan kita cerita pasal down the concentration, menuruni kecerunan. Kalau yang ni dikata against pula. So it requires energy in the form of ATP molecules that is generated during cellular respiration. So it requires specific carrier protein with specific site to bind with the certain molecules or ion. Carrier protein also possesses receptor to bind with the ATP molecules. So carrier proteins will change their shape when the phosphate group attached to it. As a result, the molecules and ion could be moved across the membrane. Okay, dia nampak sama macam kita punya passive transport. Tapi dia punya perbezaan paling ketara sekali is first, dia tak gunakan untuk yang ni, untuk active transport dia gunakan tenaga. It requires energy. So bila dia requires energy, so kenapa dia perlu requires energy? Sebab dia nak melawan kita punya kecerunan kepekatan. Ingat tak tadi saya guna analogi pasal basikal. So contoh kita ada satu bukit. Daripada bawah ni kita nak naik bukit, kita perlukan tenaga. Kita kena kayuh kuat-kuat sampailah dekat atas. Bila dah dekat atas, ini kita panggil dia against concentration. Yang ni down concentration. Bila dia turun bukit, dia tak perlu untuk kayuh pun. Sebab apa? Ada tarikan graviti yang boleh bawa dia turun. So sama lah juga. Yang ni bila down the concentration, it doesn't require energy. So active transport results in the accumulation or excretion excretion of molecules ion in the cell. Carrier proteins are involved in the active transport as the pumps. So macam tadi, kita punya passive transport pun melibatkan carrier protein juga, tapi yang ni berbeza sikit lah. So next, for example, in animal cell, the carrier protein that transport sodium ion in the extracellular and potassium ion into the cell is called as sodium-potassium pump. So inilah apa yang berlaku. So pump ni kita panggil sebagai sodium-potassium pump. So in an animal cell, it pumps 3 out sodium ion from the cell and 2 potassium ions into the cell in each cycle. So both ion move against its concentration gradient. Nak tahu lebih lanjut, nanti saya akan bagi video dia. So selain daripada itu juga, kita ada satu juga yang kita panggil sebagai proton pump. So there is another type of pump known as proton pump. So for example, the proton pump that is found in the epithelial cell of the lining in the stomach cavity. So proton pump causes the acidity of the stomach contents. Sebab itulah kalau korang pernah tahu, kita punya perut kita mempunyai asid hidroklorik yang terlampau banyak di dalam range pH dia 2. So bila pH dia 2, maksud dia sangat berasid. So the energy in the form of ATP enables the hydrogen ion to be transported by the carrier protein towards the extracellular fluid. So sama juga case dia macam yang tadi tu juga. So apa yang akan berlaku? H+ ni dia akan melawan kecerunan. So melawan kecerunan maksudnya daripada kawasan yang rendah ke tinggi. So dia akan merentasi masuk melalui carrier protein, menyebabkan dia lebih berasid. Okey, kalau korang dah belajar kimia, topik acid base dan topik acid base and salt, korang akan tahu yang bila sesuatu sebatian tu mempunyai lebih banyak ion hidrogen, ia menunjukkan bahawa bahan tersebut adalah lebih berasid berbanding bahan-bahan lain. So this causes the accumulation of the hydrogen ion and the acid production in the stomach cavity. So comparison between active and passive transport. So untuk ni kita ada aspek dia dan passive dan active transport. So first kali, untuk passive transport, dia akan bergerak, it move from the region of high concentration to a region with the low concentration, atau kita panggil dia down the concentration gradient. Tapi untuk active transport pula, dia akan gerak daripada low to high. Maksudnya dia against the concentration gradient. So need of energy. Untuk passive transport, dia tak perlukan tenaga. Tapi dekat active transport, it uses energy. Untuk type of protein membrane needed, untuk osmosis dan simple diffusion, kita tak perlukan apa-apa bantuan protein. Tapi untuk facilitated, kita guna carrier protein ataupun pore protein. Untuk active pula, kita memang akan guna carrier protein yang bertindak sebagai pump. Type of molecule transported. So basically, untuk simple diffusion, dia memang bagi banyak benda lepas, all types of substances, molecule such as lipid, gas and water. Osmosis dia memang spesifik hanya untuk air sahaja. Dan untuk facilitated pula specific molecule such as glucose and amino acid. Untuk active transport pun sama juga, spesifik juga. Tapi yang membezakan dia dengan active transport dengan facilitated diffusion, kat sini dia kena guna tenaga sebab dia melawan kecerunan. Kalau untuk facilitated tadi, dia menuruni kecerunan, down the concentration. So regulated by the cell. So untuk osmosis dan simple diffusion is not regulated by the cell, but active transport and facilitated diffusion is regulated by the cell. So dengan ini tamatlah subtopik 3.2, concept of movement of substances across the plasma membrane. So in the next video, kita akan discuss pasal 3.3 and 3.4, which is the movement of substances across a plasma membrane of a living organism and the movement of substances across the plasma membrane as well as its application in daily life. So that's all for today, for now. So we'll see you soon in our next video. Bye!